This is Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app. Now, live from the Matt Black Kia Studios.
Oh, what an attack! Whoa, what a move!
Here's Josh Hennig.
Speaking of moves, the Eagles might have some movers and shakers coming back on the team for the next couple of weeks. Yesterday, we got the news that Jalen Reagor is out. He's done for at least a couple of weeks. That thumb injury, torn thumb. You just heard the injury report with Dr. Kevin McHale with Mike Gill earlier talking about how it's possible he may not be back for at least a few weeks. But now, today, there was another Eagles wide receiver that returned to practice. Will he play this Sunday? Also, for your fantasy football needs, with all the injuries that have happened, does this Eagles receiver have value in fantasy football? So we got a lot to get to this hour. Andy McNamara from Sportsnet will talk some fantasy football and NFL Week 3 tonight on 97.3 ESPN. You have Jags, Dolphins, Fitzmagic versus Minshew Mania going on tonight. Should be a lot of points scored tonight because one of the defenses can stop basically a leaky faucet at this point. That might be two of the worst defenses in terms of the talent on the field in the league. And they're playing tonight, so there might be some points for you to make in fantasy football, as we'll get all that coming up at 6:15 with Andy McNamara. He joins us every Thursday on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. I mentioned receiver. Well, at 97.3ESPN.com, we have all the details and the video of Alshon Jeffery at Eagles practice today. Yes, Alshon Jeffery, he had the Liz Frank surgery back in December. He was back on the field, running routes, catching footballs at practice today. Now, there's no guarantee he's going to play this Sunday. But at least if he's limited in practice and he's running around, he's catching footballs, it's a good sign that he's going to play sooner than later. And I have to admit, seeing him on the field is a welcome sight because this is the Philadelphia Eagles team that in the first 4 years of Carson Wentz being the starting quarterback under Doug Peterson, the Philadelphia Eagles have had two of those seasons. They have been among the worst in the NFL in drops per target. And a big part of those drops per target issues have been no Alshon Jeffery. Remember, 2016, no Alshon Jeffery. It was in Chicago that year. And then last year, he missed a chunk of the season. So you have to think about it. With Alshon Jeffery back in play, does that make this team, well, a little bit maybe of a better option? Maybe Carson Wentz is better. I can't guarantee that because I think Carson Wentz has still played some very stubborn, hard-headed, I want to be a superhero ball the last couple of weeks. So whether Alshon Jeffery is back this week or next week, we don't know. By the way, go to 97.3ESPN.com or the 97.3 ESPN mobile app for more information on Alshon Jeffery at practice. Also, two Jacksons, not one, but two Jacksons were back at practice today. And the Eagles made an addition to finalize the 53-man roster for this Sunday. Remember, Isaac Seumalo was supposed to put on the short-term IR. So he's going to miss a few weeks. They had to put somebody on the roster. Well, go and find out who that was. You might be a little interested in that name they stuck on the roster. PlaySugarHouse.com text board is open, 609-403-0973. And looking ahead for the Eagles, the other thing that came out today in the news, Darius Slay and Brandon Graham both have stated that what Jim Schwartz said this week fired them up. It got them wanting to play for this guy. They are excited, they say. They love the fact that this guy took bullets for them. And my instinct to first come out of that is, listen, if that's what it takes to get these guys focused and fired up and realigned and recalibrated, then I hope Jim Schwartz has something like that to say every week. Listen, maybe sometimes you have to be the guy being willing to take the blame in order to elevate everybody else. And we kind of seen that in the NBA playoffs, have we not? In a similar vein. Jimmy Butler, that guy who left Philadelphia because supposedly People didn't want him here, whether it was Brett Brown or Ben Simmons or whoever. When the Miami Heat have had problems this year, he's come out and said, I got to do a better job. I got to do this. I got to do that. And for those of us in the Philadelphia area, all we hear ringing in our head is Andy Reid saying, I got to do a better job. But maybe there is something to be said when the superstar of the Heat or when the defensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles comes out and says, I have to do better. Maybe it does turn a switch on for some of these athletes on the team in their heads to say, you know what, he's willing to take the bullets. I need to step up my game. And I don't know about you, but I was among those 5 million people watching the Heat and Celtics game last night. And when I saw Tyler Hero just banging shots, Dragic hitting those jumpers, Jimmy Butler making baskets, making free throws, seeing the way the Heat played, maybe there's something to be said for the face of a situation being willing to take blame for a bad loss, and it elevates everybody else. I'm not saying it works every time, but maybe there is something to it. And yes, there was 5 million people watching that NBA game last night. We'll get a little bit of that coming up a little bit later in the show because we have to have a conversation about these television viewership numbers. It's a little bit later here on GameNight on 97.3 ESPN. Again, the text board is open, 609-403-0973. And if I could just rub it in everybody's, crawl a little bit more. The more I'm hearing about this Mike D'Antoni situation, how he might be the Sixers coach, how he's one of the finalists for the job. The report came out today that if D'Antoni comes here, there's a possibility the Sixers could get James Harden in 2 years. All right, let's have an honest conversation. Number one, why on earth would the Sixers, a team that went through a rebuild, want a 33-year-old guard in 2 years when Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid are supposed to be hitting their stride? And how exactly is Mike D'Antoni going to fix all the Sixers' problems by coming in here? You got to blow up half the roster to suit his style of play. Or is Mike D'Antoni going to adjust his roster that much? I can't stand this fact that you had a guy here who would have worked. You had a guy here that you traded for. By the way, you traded Covington and Saric and a couple other assets to get him. And you gave up even more to get Tobias Harris. If you just would have kept that team together, this team might have been better this year. And if there was really that much of an issue between the head coach and the player or the one of the star players and Jimmy Butler, don't you have to have an honest conversation about what is really more valuable? And now, after this year, you're going to say, well, because we don't have Jimmy Butler here, we need another veteran scorer in here. Let's bring in James Harden. You're going to tell me that after all the years that Harden and Embiid have chirped at each other through social media and on the court, that all of a sudden everything's going to be copacetic, bringing them together? I just don't buy it. You had a guy who would have worked here. You had Jimmy Butler, but you let him walk. You made a choice. Now you got to lay in the bed that you built. And your solution is Mike D'Antoni and James Harden? Not buying it. And to me, it's less about Harden than it is about even D'Antoni. What has this guy ever done? What is this on this guy's resume that makes you think that you can win with him? What is on this D'Antoni's resume that makes him better than Brett Brown? Listen, for all the people who were screaming, get rid of Brett Brown, now I see Sixers Twitter saying, no, not Mike D'Antoni. Well, who's your answer? Another retread like Jeff Van Gundy, Stan Van Gundy? Come on. Now, there's another poll report out there that claims that D'Antoni's also in the running for the Indiana job. Okay, fine. He's in the running for a lot of jobs. Just because somebody's in high demand doesn't mean that he's the best option for you in your job. Just remember, you could have had Jimmy Butler. Now the organization is talking about Mike D'Antoni. What a disaster. What a mess. By the way, Celtics, Heat, tomorrow night, 97.3 ESPN. Do the Heat punch their ticket to the NBA Finals? Find out tomorrow night right here on 97.3 ESPN. But tonight, we have Thursday Night Football, Dolphins, Jags at 8 o'clock, and talk more about that, fantasy football options, and more. Andy McNamara, Sportsnet, coming up next here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN, being brought to you by GMS Law. Make the right call with 4 convenient locations to serve you. Visit them online at gmslaw.com.
You're listening to Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Thursday football tonight, Jags, Dolphins. Could be a lot of points tonight. Also a lot of fantasy football points on the line. A lot of injuries this week. How are you filling your lineups in the aftermath of those injuries? Also, what about some of the big matchups this weekend? There's a lot of interesting games on the NFL slate this weekend. Talk about that and more. Andy McNamara from Sportsnet joins us again on a Thursday here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. As all guests, he joins us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Andy, welcome back. How you doing?
Oh, Josh, doing good, brother. Doing good. Football week 3 starts tonight. Love it.
So before we get to anything else, let's hit on the primary fantasy football questions, and then we'll just kind of roll with it from there.
Right.
I got to start with Saquon Barkley. I feel like almost everybody and their cousin drafted him. They had a top 5 pick. He was their top 5 pick. So this is a 2-part question. Number 1, how do you find somebody in this early in the season to fill that void? And number 2, is Devonta Freeman a viable fantasy option?
Great questions. And here's the thing. We lost the consensus top 2 fantasy football draft picks, McCaffrey and Barkley. The top 2. That is unheard of. It was a complete disaster for injuries. Everybody was panicking. My Twitter timeline was blowing up for questions, right? Here's what you have to figure out here. You're not going to replace Saquon Barkley. You're not going to replace Christian McCaffrey. What you have to do is look at opportunity. Who's going to get – are you picking up someone who's going to go into committee? Like a Devonta Freeman, for example. I like – how long is it going to take him to get ramped up? Now, the good thing is Wayne Gallman excites no one. Dion Lewis, you look at him too hard, and he falls down injured as well. Freeman, though, he's been steadily declining, but now he has fresh legs coming in. I would put him, if I was ranking, and now, folks, hopefully you're reading my waiver wire article on Tuesdays that comes out on sportsnet.ca and at AndyMC81 on Twitter, because these guys are gone now. But my ranking was for this week to pick up Jerick McKinnon for the 49ers, then Mike Davis with the Panthers, then Darrell Henderson with the Rams, then Devonta Freeman after that. And following him at number 5, Joshua Kelly, if he's still around as well. So it's a case where, okay, like I wouldn't have Freeman anywhere close to my first pick, but that's just what you might be left with, Josh. Like at this point, if you're trying to fill it now, today, Thursday, you're going to have to, probably scrape through some scraps.
We know running back is one of those positions where once you find a good option, you want to hang on to it for dear life. Well, one of those options for a lot of people last year was Raheem Mostert. Now, Mostert, Coleman, looks like neither one of them are playing. How high is Jerick McKinnon on your rankings right now for week 3?
To me, for guys to pick up, Josh is number 1. Well, he's the top add to me, and here's why. Whereas Mike Davis did nothing with Christian McCaffrey and he's going to be put into the starting role, and we're expecting him to do well, Jerick McKinnon was already doing well. He already had a defined role. First 2 weeks, he's putting up double-digit fantasy points behind 2 other guys, right? Worked in. So now what we're looking at is someone who's already a part of the offense, already has the confidence of head coach Kyle Shanahan, already up to full gear, and is going to get more work. And who's behind him? Jeff Wilson? That's not exciting anybody. I think we're going to see a mega week from Jerick McKinnon. You're facing the Giants, and you can kind of see where, since he already has a part of that playbook, that usage already, I think he's the best fit because we know he's going to be a part of it. At the very least, his floor is double-digit fantasy points. That's a great place to start.
Let's jump over to the Raiders, also on the West time zone. Josh Jacobs, back-to-back DNPs. Henry Ruggs downgraded to a limited. If you're a fantasy football player and these are two of your guys or even one of your guys, do you go out and try to get some insurance or do you try to hope for the best and wait it out?
I always try to get insurance and stockpile. And that's what I was telling people as well this week. Even if you are fine at running back or different positions, stockpile. It's one of those years, and maybe the weirdest year ever. Stockpile guys, because at worst, you can use them as trade bait, right? So always, Josh Jacobs, what a start to the year. I was a Josh Jacobs truther coming into this year. I think he's going to be amazing. Hopefully, he's not too banged up. But this is where you can't take a chance. Running back is thin. You've got to have insurance, right? And so now what do we look at behind it? Jalen Richard and Devontae Booker. Oof. Like that to me, if you're looking at just Raiders options, sign me up for some Darren Waller, who is an absolute monster already for a second straight year coming in. Now, he's a little banged up too. You got to track him. But maybe this is finally the time for a Bryan Edwards to come up just because there's not that many options. I've been disappointed in him, but with so many guys hurt or ailing, maybe this is the week for Bryan Edwards at wide receiver.
Andy McNamara joining us here on GameNight on 97.3 ESPN. Follow on Twitter at AndyMC81 for all your fantasy football, fantasy sports, as well as NFL news from Sportsnet. Andy, you mentioned stockpile. Interesting name back at practice for Philadelphia Eagles today, Alshon Jeffery. Do you suggest people maybe go and grab him off the waiver wires and maybe stash him when he returns in a week or two?
Boy, I like the idea of Alshon Jeffery, Josh. I like the idea. Can I count on him? No, I just don't think, even though he's working his way back, can he stay back? Right? Like somebody I would rather even go pick up instead of an Alshon Jeffery, despite when he's on, he can be good. I like myself a Michael Pittman Jr. with the Colts, filling in Paris Campbell down, right? I think you can go wide receiver is one of those position groups that is pretty deep, kind of like outfielders when it comes to Major League Baseball. You can get decent ones in season. So I wouldn't necessarily grab Jeffrey, even though, Rieger's going to be gone, right? I would look for a Darius Slayton. If he's still floating around with Sterling Shepard gone, that's somebody I would target for sure. Even like an Alan Lazard with Devontae Adams banged up too. He's popped, right? So those are a couple of the guys I would look at. Maybe even like an Anthony Miller out of Chicago, although I don't love it. That's somebody else that you might be able to look at instead of a guy who's not going to – he just hasn't been able to prove that he can stay healthy. And that's my concern if I'm telling someone to drop somebody else and pick him up and stash him.
Odell Beckham Jr. said today that he would not be posting big numbers in the Browns' run-based offense. If you're an owner of OBJ, are you running scared?
Yeah, and I said this last week that you should trade Odell Beckham Jr. whenever a good game pops up. And he had a good game, not a great game. For where he's drafted the name cachet, he had a good game against the bad Bengals. I think this is a sell option. We've seen how incredible Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt are in that offense. Kevin Stefanski's not a stupid guy. At least I hope not. He should be just absolutely running those guys into the ground. It's by definition his offense, that Kubiak Shanahan offense, is supposed to be run first, then tight ends, then wide receivers. And Jarvis Landry's the more reliable guy right now. He doesn't get flustered and all worked up if someone pushes him or something like OBJ. I would try to trade him because if someone didn't read that and just looks at his last week, you might be able to get a little something back. I would look to deal OBJ right now.
All right, let's bang on some of these games tonight. Thursday football, folks can hear it tonight on 97.3 ESPN. Coverage begins at 8 o'clock. Jags, Dolphins. There's a lot of fantasy potential, not just for year-round people, but DFS. This could be a juicy DFS night. Somebody wants to play a Thursday night only game.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Like you look at your DraftKings lineup, and there's actually a cool new game. I didn't even know about this. Maybe it's been out, but it's called Dark Horse Showdown for tonight's game, where your Dark Horse pick earns you 1.5 times the points of your normal picks. And it jacks up the 1.5 times the price as well. But at this game tonight, there's, for DraftKings single game or when you're just looking at the week, like I love Gardner Minshew Jr. Like that guy is a fantasy real deal. Back to like, Josh, think of this. This is real. Okay. This is real. he is having, through 2 games only, I'm not saying it's going to continue, better fantasy start to the season than Lamar Jackson, than Matthew Stafford. Come on now. That's ridiculous for Minshew. Why not tonight again, right? Like, you got Minshew. Keelan Cole, he's starting to get some real chemistry with Keelan Cole. That's the guy I put in my dark horse showdown slot. Gesicki, can he carry over? Had 1-0 week, 1 real good week. Laviska Shenault Jr., I want to see. This is the guy. I picked him up off waivers after week 1 here, Josh, because I think I'm going to have him on my bench this week. But I think this guy is showing through 2 games, getting a little more work. You can do a little wildcat. You can line him up in the backfield. You can pop him into a receiver. It's a weapon. And as he starts getting more comfortable, I think Shenault Jr. is somebody you have to have on your roster. That's another guy I would rather have for his upside over, let's say, an Alshon Jeffery.
Philadelphia Eagles are playing the Bengals this Sunday. Right now, Mike Daniels and Geno Atkins, DNPs. That's their top 2 D tackles. Looks like they're on track to maybe not play this week. Are you buying into a potential Eagles offensive resurgence for week 3?
Yes, the Jets and the Bengals are that magic elixir, right? You need to get fixed. You need a little confidence boost, right? You play the Bengals or you play the Jets. Now, the difference is Joe Burrow, I think, is going to be a heck of a quarterback. I think he's going to be he's going to keep the Eagles on their toes, which would, I hope, fantasy-wise, mean maybe a bit of a shootout like we saw between Baker Mayfield and Joe Burrow last Thursday, right? So if I'm looking at this team with the Eagles, do I love both tight ends? Absolutely. Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert, I love it. I think Miles Sanders, he's coming back. You got to love Miles Sanders. I'm still fading on the wide receivers overall just because I think it's still a little too spread out for me and a little bit too many question marks when it comes to who I can trust for fantasy. But we've seen, like Josh, this year and last year, both Ertz and Goddard can be top 10, fantasy tight ends. It's remarkable. And Miles Sanders, we saw at the start, he's going to get the full load as long as he can stay healthy. That's a guy you got to light up. So I like the tight ends and the running backs for the Eagles this week in that matchup.
Speaking of spread out, the Rams like to spread the rock around, and they're going against the Bills team that has actually a pretty solid defensive personnel. Does maybe that matchup concern you that maybe the Rams offense hits a wall this Sunday?
I love that question, and I had to consider that myself because I'm a Robert Woods owner, and I have him on my bench this week. And I love Robert Woods. I think he's underrated overall, needs more touchdowns, more red zone targets. But this is the week. That Buffalo Bills team is for real. And they're good. They're real good. I think you downgrade all fantasy weapons when it comes to the Rams. Now, in some cases, you're going to have to start. If you don't have a better option than Robert Woods, play him, right? It's better than just going on a whim. You at least know he's going to get a lot of looks. Same with Cooper Kupp. The tight ends, I don't know, the 2 tight end set, and then you got Everett who's sort of banged up and Higbee here and there. I don't love it. When you look at the running backs, that's another situation where I think you got to really lean on Henderson here with Brown and Akers banged up. That could be a spot where they can make a little noise if they can involve Henderson a bit more in the passing game. So I'd say my top Ram would be Henderson, and I'm fading on everybody else there.
Speaking of fading, outside of Michael Thomas this year, it feels like the Saints offense is kind of a mess right now, especially after we saw on Monday night. I got to ask you, I know they're playing on Sunday Night Football. It's a big, Rodgers, Breeze, but can we really buy the Saints offense at this point, considering the fact that, listen, it's not like the Raiders have some world beaters on defense. It's not like they have some great defense, and it's not like they were putting up a lot of points. I mean, I think Emmanuel Sanders didn't have even a target in the first half of that game.
Yeah, that was disappointing. Now, my pick for that game, because I got a lot of questions, Sanders or Traquan Smith. I went with Smith. I put it in one of my articles to go with Smith. That looked to pay off, but still not the same type of output you were hoping. I think we're seeing Drew Brees on the decline, and it's a case where I don't really want to believe it because he's so good and has been so good for so long, future Hall of Famer. But man, can you trust him? I think the only true start when Michael Thomas is not in the lineup is Alvin Kamara, because he can dink and dunk his way and he can carry the ball. I think Alvin Kamara is the only must start right now for the Saints. I like if you're thin at tight end or you don't have a better option. I do like what Jared Cook brings, but he's so touchdown dependent, right? The yards are just never there. 13 yards last week, got a touchdown. And it was still not double digits. 5 catches the week before, 80 yards. Like he's not a guy who's going to post up a lot of yardage, so he's really TD dependent, and that worries me, especially against a Green Bay defense that's given up the 9th fewest fantasy points to tight ends this season.
Andy McNamara joining us here on the Boardwalk Hunter Hotline on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. You can follow him on Twitter at AndyMC81. Let's hit a couple more games here, Andy. Julio Jones, DNP today.
Ooh.
2-part question. 1, what do you suggest for the fantasy football owners of Julio Jones to do with him, considering that even when he has played, he hasn't gotten the majority of the targets this year? And number 2, this Falcons offense versus the Bears. The Bears don't really have the same defense they've had in the past, even though it's still Khalil Mack out there.
No, that's true. And Julio Jones is one of the more frustrating fantasy players to me, Josh. I think we've talked about it before. Every week there's a Q beside his name. Every week, for like 4 years. It's a toe, it's an ankle, it's something. Had a great week 1, didn't do anything in week 2. You have other options as well in Atlanta, which Matt Ryan is not afraid to sling it. What does the Chicago defense do then? So if you're a Julio owner and he is cleared, you got to start him. He's Julio Jones, and he's played through worse. But my preferred players right now, especially if he's a bit limited, would be Russell Gage over Calvin Ridley, because he's still going to see secondary coverage. You can plop Hayden Hurst in as well, who had a nice bounce back after a bad week 1. It seems like the amount that Matt Ryan throws the ball, there is a ton of opportunity, and all these guys can eat. So I think you're going to be in a case where, again, if he's questionable and it looks like he's a bit iffy or going to be limited, like that's where you got to pay attention coming up to Sunday. If not, see if you can get a Russell Gage if he's available. Ridley's going to be gone, but Gage can still be had potentially in some season long, and he's going to be the cheapest of the 3 and still have really good outputs. Like he's had the first 2 weeks, 20.4 and 16.6 in PPR fantasy points. That's phenomenal for a guy who's cheaper on DraftKings and still available in 50% of most fantasy leagues. Go get him.
Game number 2 of our Sunday triple header here on 97.3 ESPN. Following the Eagles versus Bengals game, we will have the Cowboys versus the Seahawks. The over-under currently right now is 56 at a lot of sports books. I got to ask you, how many points do you think is going to be scored in this game? This game seems like it's 2 teams that are just saying, bring on the points.
Oh, I hope it's over. I hope that's the one, whether you have a rooting interest or not, you just sit back with the popcorn and watch it go. You got Prescott, who's grooving. You got Russell Wilson, who just a ridiculous talent if you needed to be reminded. Chris Carson's going, DK Metcalf, Lockett a bit below him. The triplets going, really the quadruplets, I guess, if you include Zeke with the weapons along with Dak Prescott. Like, it's an embarrassment of riches. And it just becomes a case of, all right, if I don't want to put all of them, so who do I look at? And if I'm looking at Dallas real quick, it goes Amari Cooper, then it goes CeeDee Lamb. Gallup seems to be the guy who might be getting a little lost in the shuffle there. Got to start Zeke. And for the Seahawks, you avoid the tight ends for the most part. You dial yourself up some DK Metcalf.
Love it, love it. Andy McNamara joins us every Thursday. Make sure you're following him on Twitter, AndyMC81. Andy, before I let you go, you're up there in the Great North, up there in the Toronto region, Sportsnet, you're up there. I got to know from you, what's the mood like up there in the sports landscape with the locals? Because Toronto got knocked out early in the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Yeah.
Toronto Raptors got knocked out a little bit sooner than some people expected. And now the Blue Jays, their hopes for a playoff spot are hanging on by a thread, basically.
Yeah, that's right. And they do. The Jays get Nate Pearson back, should be tonight or tomorrow, into the bullpen. So you get that big-armed, 100-plus mile-an-hour rookie out of the pen to come in. I think that's pretty exciting. But the Raptors fans, we were disappointed. But although we'll always appreciate Kawhi Leonard, it kind of felt good to watch him go too, right? It's kind of like your ex, right? It's like you don't want them to be miserable, but you also don't want them to be that happy. And that's kind of where I put it with Kawhi. So that gave us a little bit of joy. But we're hoping for the Blue Jays to at least get some playoff. They're not going to win the World Series, but what we hope for this young core, you get in, you experience some of the postseason, even though it's in this weird, no fans world, and at least you get that, and you're playing important games now. I think that's more important for a growth and maybe a longer run next year. But everybody that I talk to is just super pumped about the NFL, so everyone's loving that.
Well, I mean, they are 29-27. I mean, they got a winning record, unlike our Phillies down here. So, they got that going for you, you know?
That's right. I love the Phillies. It's all good.
Hey, listen, if you're a fantasy player, you know, Bryce Harper has done well for you in fantasy baseball this year, but I hope no one ever had any Phillies pitchers this year because that's been a dumpster fire. So.
Boy, that's rough. Same with like Red Sox pitchers too overall. And it's so weird, right? With this season, expanded rosters, you have like for the Jays, the only serviceable fantasy starter was Hyun-Jin Ryu. Nobody else gets past the fourth inning. It gets weird, right? Like all these expanded bullpens. So it was a very strange and different year for fantasy baseball. It was different.
Absolutely. He's Andy McNamara, joins us each week on GameNight, talk NFL and fantasy football here on 97.3 ESPN. Follow him on Twitter, AndyMC81 on Twitter, AndyMC Sports on Instagram. And as all guests, he appears on GameNight on the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Andy, great conversation. Always enjoy it.
Oh, love it, Josh. Enjoy the games, everybody.
Again, Thursday football tonight. Fitzmagic versus Minshew Mania at 8 o'clock. Coverage begins here on 97.3 ESPN. And I mentioned the triple header this Sunday coming up. Eagles, Bengals, Merrill Reese, Mike Quick on the call at 1 p.m. here on 97.3 ESPN, followed by Cowboys, Seahawks, and then Sunday night football. It's the two old school quarterbacks, Rodgers, Breeze, all the action right here on 97.3 ESPN.
Now, more Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Game Night here on 97.3 ESPN being brought to you by SHM Financial. Are you quickly approaching or are you currently in retirement? Don't get overwhelmed. Contact SHM Financial. Give them a call at 1-800-MONEY-SHM. That's 1-800-MONEY-SHM. And you can visit them online at shmfinancial.com. PlaySugarHouse.com. Text board is open, 609-403-0973. Joey D. and Ventnor chimes in. He says Jimmy Butler was never staying in Philadelphia, unfortunately. He stated he wanted to go to Miami before the Sixers stopped. T-Wolves traded him to get something before he walked. Well, here's the thing, Joey D. And I appreciate you chiming in as you always do. The problem is that you got to pick and choose at what point Jimmy Butler said something about a team. Right? You got to pick and choose about what he said. Like when Jimmy Butler was on the Chris Haynes podcast back in January of 2019, he said this about the 76ers.
Everybody's been so helpful in everything. You know, me and some new everybody in the organization. You know, teammates are great, coach is great, EB great, fan base great. I don't have too many complaints right now. I really don't. I'm happy. I can tell you that.
So back in January 2019, everybody was great. He loved everybody. He loved being on the Sixers. Everybody was great. What did Jimmy Butler want in January 2019? What will he consider in free agency?
I don't think that I can put money over my happiness. I don't think I can put basketball over my happiness. Like, I've learned that over the years. I got to be happy if I want to play basketball at a high level anyways and then worry about a payday. But with that being said, the way that I move and the people I have around me, I want to make sure that they happy too. They got families to take care of, and they have jobs wherever I go. So it's kind of like, you know, are you good here? Are you good here?
So he's got to consider about being happy. He wanted to consider about, you know, people he's got to take care of. And what was his ultimate perspective on the Sixers back in January of 2019 was? That
we can be so good and we can be equally as bad, because I think that too much of any good thing is a bad thing. And the second that we decide that we have that much talent, we're going to be able to cruise through this thing, it's going to be a sad story for the 76ers. But I will say, we don't have guys that think like that. We got guys that want everybody to be great. I will say that, and we got guys that want to win and that pay attention and that want to learn and that are asking all the right questions. That's the best part about the young group of guys that we have.
So that's what Jimmy Butler said back in January of 2019. So I kind of have to disagree with you, Joey D. from Ventnor, because if I'm going to take Jimmy at his word, and we know Jimmy has kind of changed his narrative a couple times over the years. We take Jimmy at his word. He was happy in Philadelphia. He liked the people in Philadelphia. He liked who he was playing with in Philadelphia. So what changed between the end of January 2019 and the end of June 2019? I'll tell you what changed. What changed is that the 76ers made it clear that, number one, they weren't going to give him the full number of years that he wanted on a contract. Let's not forget that. Because there were a lot of reports that if he would have been given all the years that he wanted by Philadelphia, he would have re-signed in Philadelphia. Number two, what happened? Well, if you go back to the other reports about what happened, was that apparently Brett Brown and Ben Simmons weren't too thrilled with Jimmy Butler. They weren't too crazy about him behind the scenes. In public, they were complimentary, and behind the scenes, they weren't too thrilled. So the Sixers chose Josh Richardson and Al Horford and Brett Brown and Ben Simmons over Jimmy Butler, basically. So never overlook the fact that Jimmy Butler was here already. He was here. And you moved on. And now he's one game away from going to the NBA Finals with Tyler Hero, Goran Dragic, Bam Adebayo, Eric Spoelstra, and a partridge in a pear tree. And the 76ers are sitting at home while Joel Embiid is playing video games and Ben Simmons is hanging out with his supermodel girlfriend and Brett Brown's on the unemployment line and Mike D'Antoni's a finalist for this job. You want to know how we got here? That's how we got here. But Joey D from Ventnor, I appreciate you chiming in. I always appreciate hearing from Joey D. 609-403-0973, the PlaySugarHouse.com text board. Place your legal sports bets at PlaySugarHouse.com. Sign up now. They'll match your first deposit up to $250. Must be 21 or older to play. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 609-403-0973. To get on the conversation. Again, Thursday night football. I'm telling you right now, the last time I checked, the over-under for the game tonight was 49. Now, let me check my numbers one more time to see what the latest update on these numbers are. But the last time I checked, it was 49 on this Jags-Dolphins over-under. Let's see what we got here. Latest update on the numbers is still 49. Most sports books, it's 49, although you get a couple 49.5s at a couple places, but generally it's 49. I would take the over on this game tonight. I don't think either of these teams plays very good defense. You know, Fitzmagic has been chucking up a lot of yards early on in the season. Minshew mania, you tell me the Dolphins are going to stop him? Please get out of here. I think we're going to have points tonight. That's my pick for the night right there. Over 49. We'll see how we do there. By the way, so far on the year on the football picks, we'll give out my football picks tomorrow here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN, following ESPN NFL insider Mike Clay at 6:20 tomorrow. Football Friday, we'll have my football picks following Mike Clay on a Football Friday tomorrow on 97.3 ESPN. Currently 14-7. Not too bad. Not too bad so far this year. We'll add 49 to the over-unders tonight. PlaySugarHouse.com, text board 609-403-0973. Dan from EHT chimes says, come on, Spoelstra and Riley or Brown and Brand? Well, look, you're looking at it with a 2020 vision now. But the Heat, nobody expected the Heat to be here they are right now. The only people who expected the Miami Heat to be one game away from the NBA Finals were the handful of dudes who bought Miami Heat futures tickets and the people who live in Miami. Pat Riley has been trying to sell this Heat culture for a long time. He just happened to have somebody who would buy into it. Dan from EHT. Don't overlook the fact that the Sixers could have kept Jimmy Butler. Now, it might not have been Elton Brand and Brett Brown. It might have been Elton Brand and somebody else. They could have told Brett Brown, pound sand, go walk, and kept Jimmy Butler. There is a history of coaches getting farther in the playoffs, but then them saying, nope, we're done. There's history of it. Look at Doug Collins got to a conference finals with the Bulls. Rick Carlisle, conference finals with the Pistons. Both of them got fired. They got replaced. They won championships a couple years later, both those franchises. So there's nothing crazy what the Sixers could have said. We'll keep Jimmy Butler, but we'll move on from Brett Brown. I don't think that's the craziest thing in the world they could have done. I think there's a huge contingent of Sixers fans who would love that to have happened. Come on, let's be realistic. Before we get out of here on Game Night 97.3 ESPN, I got a vent. I'm a little annoyed. I'm a little aggravated, and it's because I keep seeing a lot of propaganda online, and I keep running into people that are putting out there a bunch of hogwash and lies about sports right now. I keep seeing the propaganda that viewership is down for the NBA, viewership is down for the NFL. Well, it's actually not. See, what's going on is that the numbers that are being put out there by a lot of people who have an agenda, who want to make you think that people are not watching sports as much as they used to. They're not factoring in that television viewership on linear television. Remember, a lot of the television ratings are based off of people who still have cable and dish, okay? The viewership is down because there's less people watching television. Television watching is down by over 22% across the board over the last year. And over the last few years, it's almost down 50%, all television watching across the board. And with that being said, these NBA playoff games, these last few weeks, have been some of the most watched television programs across all demos. Last night's Eastern Conference Finals Game 4 drew around 5 million people. It peaked around almost 5.5 million at 11 p.m. last night. It was the second most watched playoff game this season last night, and it was the most watched program across all television last night. Every Lakers playoff game has been the most watched game on cable television every night except for one night. Sunday night, they got crushed by what? Sunday Night Football. That was the most watched show on television. By the way, the NFL is still averaging around 20 million viewers per game. Tampa Bay, New Orleans, that had 25 million plus people watching. A mediocre NFL game is still getting 7.7 million people watching. Listen, there may be a handful of people who are not watching certain sports. You know what was not watched this weekend? The U.S. Open. The lowest number of viewers for a U.S. Open final weekend, Saturday and Sunday, since 1987. 3.2 million people watched the final round of the U.S. Open. The previous low for the U.S. Open was back in 2014, 4.6 million. You know what they're not watching? They're not watching golf. You know, NASCAR's playoff, lowest viewership of the last few years. Why? It's going up against football. It's going against NBA Finals. You know, the Stanley Cup Finals got crushed by Monday Night Football. Next time somebody wants to tell you that nobody's watching the NBA and the NFL, ask them why the NBA and the NFL are among the most watched shows on television right now. They won't have a good answer for you because they have an agenda. I'm Josh Hennig. This is Game Night. I'll catch you tomorrow.